Good afternoon. I'm Kathy LaMartina from South Florida Water Management District, and this presentation I gave to the Treasure Coast Council of Local Governments quite a while ago, and so it was requested for me to come. I just want to say that it's usually a little bit longer, so I'm going to go through several of the slides probably pretty quickly, but it is information that you really already know. Okay, so the major watershed in South Florida is the Kissimmee-Okeechobee Everglades watershed, where historically the water fell and the Kissimmee chain of lakes went through the river into the lake. The lake would rise and it would overflow its southern boundaries and then go through the River of Grass very slowly, ultimately into Florida Bay and the Atlantic Ocean. Well, today we have a man-made system with the Central and South Florida project, which has changed that delivery very greatly. So what caused that change? Why did we have to construct that project? The historical problems leading to that were mainly the hurricanes of the 20s and the 40s. The state at that point in time asked the federal government for help. They actually came down and started constructing the project, which was authorized in 1948. The major components of the project include channelization of the Kissimmee, the St. Lucie, and the Caloosahatchee rivers, the construction of the Hoover Dike, the construction of the conservation areas, which was compartmentalizing them, the construction of the protective levees around the Everglades agricultural area and the lower East Coast, as well as the construction of the drainage network, which are the sea canals and the salinity structures associated with them. So this is our little portion of the CNSF project up here in the Treasure Coast. We have the C25, the C24, and the C23 canals, and we also have the C44 canal, which is the only canal that's connected to Lake Okeechobee. We have the salinity structures to the east. We have the S80 structure, which is the lock structure, and then there's the S308 structure at Lake Okeechobee, which is the structure that needs to be open for water to flow into the C44 canal and ultimately into the St. Lucie estuary. This is a 1940s aerial of Martin County. I know it's a little bit difficult to see, but the purpose of it is just to show that all the wetlands are in place, they're all connected, and you can really just see how water tended to flow from northwest to southeast. I also want to point out that here is the South Fork of the St. Lucie estuary, and this is the Loxahatchee River and Kitchen Creek, and they really kind of almost met here in the middle. So when there was a lot of rainfall, it was very chaotic down here, and water could really either go to the north or go to the south into the Loxahatchee, depending on the situation. I also want you to note that the canal was constructed at that time, and that Martin County actually held a celebration relating to the opening of the commerce from east to west. Oops, sorry. This is a 2000 aerial of Martin County, just really showing the contrast from the two. There's a big disconnect of the wetlands now due to agriculture and urbanization. Also, the connection between the South Fork and the Loxahatchee River is no longer there. The canal is still there, and as you can see, there's a lot of development. This is the C23 canal, and just what I wanted to show you here is the salinity structure. Each of our canals have these structures. They're non-movable structures, and they protect our water supply system from saltwater intrusion. This is the C25 up in St. Lucie County. This is looking east, just showing the different types of land use that the canal helps for flood protection, including agriculture and to the east, the urban areas. This is the S80 structure in tropical farms. It includes the locks here, but also the water control structure, which in this picture is flowing. But just because it's flowing, it does not mean that it is water from Lake Okeechobee. You would have to drive 27 miles west to see whether the S308 structure is open. If that structure is open, then this would include water from Lake Okeechobee. If it's not, then this is just providing flood protection for the local C-44 basin. Okay, the Water Management District's core mission is flood protection, water quality, water supply, and natural systems, and there are 5 water management districts in the state. The South Florida Water Management District includes 18,000 square miles, 2,100 miles of canals and levees, more than 600 water control structures and project culverts, 70 pump stations, 8.1 million residents, 3 million acres of agriculture, and vast areas of natural area. At the heart of our water management system is Lake Okeechobee. It has a 5,000 square mile watershed, which is in yellow here. The lake itself is 730 square miles. It is a very shallow lake of about 12 feet. The water levels are driven largely by climate, and it serves multiple purposes. This picture depicts the inflows and outflows to the lake. The inflows are red, and the size of the arrow actually depicts the size of the structure. So as you can see, the inflow structures have a greater capacity of bringing water into the lake than the outflow structures, which are in blue. And actually, the outflow capacity is very disproportionate as well, because the east and west outflows are 80% of that outflow capacity, where the capacity down to the south is only 14%. So that's one of the problems we have with this system. This slide just shows you who manages what, because right around Lake Okeechobee, we have 2 entities that manage it. The Corps is in red. They manage the Okeechobee Waterway and all of the facilities associated with that, and the Water Management District manages the blue. I'm just going to give you a scenario on what happens with the system. So if it's raining in Florida, water comes together and goes in the Kissimmee chain of lakes. It gathers, it gets into the Kissimmee River and flows into the lake. Runoff also gathers from the EAA, or the Everglades Agricultural Area, goes into the canal system and starts moving south. At this point in time, the lake water is released from the lake through the EAA into the water control areas through the stormwater treatment areas. There's also basin runoff from the C-43 basin, which collects into the canals, goes out the S-79 structure, meets up with the tidal basin runoff, and eventually goes out to the Gulf of Mexico. The same thing happens over on our coast. The C-44 basin runoff collects, goes into the canal, goes through the S-80 structure into the St. Lucie estuary, where it meets up with the tidal basin runoff and goes into the Atlantic Ocean. At this point in time, the system is totally full. It's working, it's doing its job, but it is full. The problem is it hasn't stopped raining yet. So what happens at this point in time, because more water is coming into the lake than can go out, that's when they tend to open up the S-308 structure, which provides way too much fresh water into the system and aggravates the estuary. The same thing happens on the west coast through the S-77 and the Caloosahatchee. If we go back to 2013, through the wet season, we had a tremendous amount of rainfall then. District-wide, it was 117% over average, or 5.5 inches more than we usually get. The wet season started a couple of weeks early. It started May 18th. All basins were more than 100% above average. April through July was a very wet period, and the April through August period was the second wettest period in the 81-year record. Now, if we go to this dry season, just the November to January time period, we had so much rainfall. We received 16 inches of rain in that 3-month period. And it was over 300% of average, or more than 10 inches, almost 11 inches more than we usually get. The dry season lasts through May, and we usually only average 18 or less inches for that whole time period. But in 3 months, we received almost all of that. There was record rainfall in January, which was over 7 inches above the historical average, and the November to January period was the wettest since record. And of course, this is the lake regulation schedule. And again, I went back to 2013 because this is just how the Corps decides what to do with the lake. And this is just a snapshot in time, and it's showing in the middle of October, the lake is still dangerously high at about 15.5 feet, and we still have a month left for hurricane season. And so that was a decision that caused them to continue releases from the lake at that time. Again, in 2013, this is a composite of the freshwater inflows into the estuary. There's the graph, but I'd like you to look at the table up here because the first line is the C23, 24, and 10 Mile Creek. The second line is the C44 basin runoff, and then the third line is Lake Okeechobee water. So from January to May, the percentages of fresh water that came into the estuary from these sources was 59%, 32%, and then 9% respectively. In June, it was 45, 43, and 13, and really started to rain in July, showing at 36, 28, and 37, and then in August, it was 14, 17, 70% for the lake. September, 40, 32, 28, and with a composite of that period of time, it was 30%, 26, and 44%. There are other constraints besides just the facilities themselves that limit discharges south. We have the treatment capacity of the stormwater treatment areas. Those were designed to hold between about 6 and 18 inches of water. If you put more water in them, the plants will die, and of course the treatment won't happen. So you have to be very careful how much water you put in the stormwater treatment areas. We also have flood control in the Everglades agricultural area. We have to provide flood protection for everybody in our district, including the farms. We have protected species that we have to watch out for. The Cape sable sparrow is one. They tend to nest on the ground, and so we can't push water through their nesting area because it would hurt their nesting area. And the water control area levee, the integrity of that, as those levees protect the urban areas east of them. Water levels in the Shark River Slough and discharge capacities of the facilities south are also a constraint. And these are still just some of the many constraints that there are to moving water south. Okay. This is just an annual that shows the water discharges to the estuary through the blue is the C44, the red's the C23, and the green is the C24. It just kind of shows you it's an annual discharge, so it's just a total, but you can just see by looking at it when Lake Okeechobee discharges. It's these big spikes here and probably a lot of these larger spikes as well. This is the total phosphorus, and so if you look again, you will see that actually the C44 is in pretty good shape. We have our total maximum daily load at about 0.125 here, and it stays pretty low, almost below that at times, where our local canals, the C23 and 24, are much higher. This is just showing you that there is a relationship between rainfall and the nutrients. So the rainfall are the bars, so when it rains, the nutrients go up, and when it doesn't rain, they go down. And that's typical of any basin. So nutrients are a problem, but so is the great amount of fresh water that comes in through the lake. Again, this is 2013. In June, the estuary conditions were the North and South Fork were pretty much fresh, but the middle estuary down towards the inlet were still okay with their salinity concentrations, but a month later, just 30 days later, the entire estuary went to almost zero salinity. And why is that bad? Because oysters can't tolerate that. The juveniles die after about 7 days of salinities less than 5, and the adults can only handle about a month. So why do we get all this fresh water? Well, through development, this was Peacock Ranch in St. Lucie County, which was pretty much 100% pervious. Developers come in, they fill the house pads and start building, and, by the end, we have more impervious area than we do pervious area. And when the water hits these roofs and roads, it runs off faster, quicker, and a greater volume of it gets to the estuary than if it was a pervious area. Okay, and also just the way that we treat our households. We have roads, we have where cars leak greases and oils on them. Our yards, we like to have green yards, so we fertilize them and we put pesticides down. And when it rains, what happens to all these things? The water picks it all up and puts it right in these waterways, and it goes right out into the estuary. Now, this is a golf course, and this is a stormwater management area in the golf course, and that's very good for taking out the nutrients. But what happens on the golf courses is they treat weeds with a copper sulfate solution. That gets into the waterway. That poisons the macroinvertebrates at the bottom. And then you have, a food chain issue that, again, gets out into the regular waterway, into the estuary, and causes a problem there. And we also have these intermittent ditches, and we have areas of septic tanks. A few years back, the district did a study on tracers using acetaminophen, which goes into the body and goes out of the body the same way. And they tested 22 of these similar sites, and out of the 22 sites, 20 came up positive hits for acetaminophen. So what are the solutions to some of these problems? Well, we do have the total maximum daily load, which established the water quality standards, and that will show us what we have to do to get to a good place for the estuary. So we put together the Basin Management Action Plan, which actually shows the projects that we can do to get there, and they're regional and local restoration efforts. We also have alternative storage projects and outreach efforts so that people know what they should and shouldn't do on their property. You all know this. This is a Martin County stormwater treatment area. It's the Salerno Creek STA. And what it does, it's been able to capture water from these low-income areas, and it treats the water prior to it getting out into the Manatee Pocket. This is Platts Creek, which is a similar one in St. Lucie County. This one, the water comes in through Platts Creek into the Stilling Basin. It gets pumped into the pond where alum, it's treated with alum. Alum helps the nutrients fall out of the water column prior to it discharging back into the North Fork of the estuary. We also have the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. That's a cost-sharing program between the federal government and the state. Its goals are to restore and improve water quality, quantity, timing, and distribution. And the SERP goal is, again, here's the historical pre-drainage flow, our current flow, and this is the goal of the restored SERP flow. The Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan includes 68 components to be implemented over 35 years. Some of the pre-SERP projects, including the Kissimmee River, where before the river was 106 miles of oxbows. The Corps came in and it was straightened to 56 miles, so we had to go back and restore it, and it's really quite a success, and it's almost complete. Our little part of the SERP project is the Indian River Lagoon South. It includes the C-44 reservoir and stormwater treatment area. Both components are currently under construction. It also includes the C-23-24 reservoirs and stormwater treatment areas, the C-25, and it also includes 90 acres of natural water storage treatment, where about 30% of that has been purchased. So the goals of the Indian River Lagoon South are habitat quality improvement and quality of water supply and maintaining the existing level of flood protection. This is the C-44 reservoir. As I said, it's currently under construction. Some of our natural land components, this is Alapata Flats. We also have dispersed water management, which includes contracting with both private and public landowners for holding additional water. This happens to be the Calkins Water Farm. And we have the Central Everglades Planning Project, which will again help bring water south from the lake. And the 20-year commitment to the Everglades restoration, the governor's plan, including $5 billion in state funds over the next 20 years. So I'm sorry if I went over my time a little bit.
You nailed it.
Oh, okay. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Commissioner Fielding?
Thank you so much for coming. I thought this would be very useful for us to see. The district has helped us. I know some have been very, I don't know a kind word to say at the moment, but the district has helped us in facing this current problem. We can't magically do something that we wish we could do, but we got this problem, so we appreciate what the district has done. And the underlying thing, as I see, is that you have allowed Army Corps to have more flexibility because you have helped keep waters from coming into the lake to put that pressure on Army Corps that they had to release, because we're higher now than we have been, I think, ever at this time of the year, while the lake has been under a management type regimen. So y'all have really, you've been very helpful, very done. Now, in saying that, if we're going to try to fix this thing, we've got to really step up to the plate. And one of the things we're going to have to recognize is that TMDLs, that won't cut it. TMDLs, total maximum daily load, that's just a prescription to allow polluters to continue to pollute. That won't cut it. What we've got to do is we've got to, over a period of time, we've got to eliminate the contaminants. Now, some people call them nutrients. That's what you get out of a cereal box. These are contaminants. These are pollutants. We've got to eliminate these pollutants that are going into the lagoon. That's what we've got to do. We can't do it tonight, but we can start on it. And so I'm not fussing at you because you and I agree very, very much. But what I am saying is that the public, I believe the public needs to become more aware that we're experiencing a crisis currently, and it will pass. But if we want to help restore the lagoon, we must be focused on what it will take to restore the lagoon. And that will be to stop polluting with these chemicals, with these even yard waste, even grass, even trimmings. Those become nitrogen. So we've got to become focused on solving the pollution problem in our lagoon. And you've done so well, and thank you so much for coming to visit with us.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Hurd?
Yeah, I also would like to thank the district for being flexible and looking for all the capacity that you can find in the system to provide us with additional storage so that we can reduce the discharges into the estuary. We've certainly seen in the last week, particularly during high tides, at the inlet, there's clean water coming in, so the water quality conditions have improved dramatically, and we're grateful for that. But the latest blue-green algae event wasn't just about water quantity. It was about water quality. And when we have disastrous conditions in the St. Lucie River and the Indian River Lagoon, it's because we're receiving discharges of very polluted water from Lake Okeechobee. And we in Martin County do everything that we can through our comprehensive plan to regulate protection of natural resources and our residents through fertilizer ordinances, through limiting septic sizes, keeping densities down. We don't have those developments like you showed us on one of the slides in St. Lucie County. We protect our wetlands. We've spent $64 million in the last 15 years to build STAs. So we've done an awful lot in order to protect our water quality and our residents, and still we have these terrible, terrible impacts. I agree with Commissioner Fielding. BMPs are not working. TMDLs are not working. We need to strengthen our standards, our protections, instead of doing what I suspect the DEP committee is doing today, which is weakening them. So we need a lot of help from the state's part to do a better job of protecting water quality. We also need to do a better job of testing. When we're having a catastrophe, as we were having, the DEP was doing testing that was ineffective. It wasn't enough, and we're not at all convinced that we were testing for all the right things. There's mounting evidence that the toxins that are present in the blue-green algae cause chronic neurodegenerative diseases that are intolerable. We don't want to be looking at a future in which we're a cluster of these terrible neurological diseases because of the unknown toxins that are airborne and waterborne. We need to make sure that we're testing for the right things, and we need to coordinate with the federal government agencies in order to make sure that we're testing for the right things. And also, we need to coordinate with the Army Corps of Engineers to expedite EAA storage. We can't wait. I think the integrated delivery schedule says 2020. 2019, 2020, we're going to begin planning for EAA storage.
2021, I believe.
Yeah, we can't wait. We need to start that right now, and it needs to be expedited review. And fortunately, this is one time in history that the biggest constraint that we always have is we don't have the money. We do have the money, fortunately, through the wise decision-making of Florida voters. We passed Amendment 1, so we do have the money in order to expedite those critical projects that will save the Everglades, and save the greater Everglades too, and save the Indian River Lagoon. Thanks.
I want to be very careful, because you're the messenger, not to shoot the messenger, but I am so distressed about the water management district because it's not managing. And the mailing that went out in June, the myth versus fact, is an insult to our residents. To say that it is a myth that the South Florida water management is not doing anything to help lessen releases or address blue-green algae, to say that's a myth. We're managing the releases. It's just, what about the blue-green algae? What are you testing for? Are you testing for what's the one? Very fast death factor, anatoxin A. Are you testing for nodularin? Are you testing for cylindrospermopsin? Are you testing for anatoxin AS? Are you testing for BMAA? These are the ones that are linked to Alzheimer's. Sorry, can't say cause, because you'll claim that I have fomented another myth, which is that blue-green algae has been proven to cause neurodegenerative disease. That's not a myth. And the opposite of a fact isn't a myth. It is alleged. It is a hypothesis. It is being scientifically tested, and they are getting closer and closer to proving that there is a connection between the toxins in blue-green algae and Alzheimer's and Lou Gehrig's disease. Are you testing for those toxins, or do you just say, well, that's a myth, it hasn't been proven? And again, I know you're the messenger, and I apologize, but this is a health crisis for us that is not being recognized and is not being tested for and is not being warned about. It is not being managed. We cannot manage it. You are sending the blue-green algae to us. It's in the lake. And in doing so, you say, you got a lot of basin runoff there. That's a pretty bad thing. You got some fertilizer causing some problems. It's insulting. It's distressing for our population, and I am desperately afraid for us, and you don't share our desperation or our fear. And I don't understand why, except that those diseases take a long time to come on, and the research takes a long time to point the strong finger, but it is being researched. It's not a myth. And to say that it hasn't been proven doesn't make it untrue. So I am very, very upset with the South Florida Water Management District with its continued position of, I don't know how you guys get up in the morning. I don't know how you go to work and say the things you say. And I don't think it's coming from you. It must be coming from somewhere else, from your board, from Tallahassee. But this thing going on all the time is just wrong. And I apologize to you, Ms. LaMartina. I know you care, but we are suffering very real health threats because of ridiculous politics, and it's not right. Commissioner Smith?
Okay. Deb, or Kathy, do we also have the charts or part of the PowerPoint anywhere that show the basin runoff numbers that show what we're getting out of the basin? Do you have any of that with you, or is that?
Deb Drum, Ecosystem Manager, for the record. We don't have anything with us here now, but I mean, the amount of basin water that comes, or the amount of lake water that comes into our estuary, it just depends on, as Kathy showed, all the percentages that she walked you through, that can change very quickly. It can flip-flop. It can be majority of basin water, 70% basin water, and then it can be 70% lake water within a couple months. So I think that was demonstrated with the graphs.
I just think at some point it would be helpful to see a couple of years worth of data that shows what actually is happening, so that people really understand when it's ours, when it's the lakes, when it's somebody's, so that when we're directing anger towards the problem, we're channeling it in the right direction, so that we don't lose focus of that. Because
I can look into that.
And what we can say is that we know over a very long period of record that the percentages speak very clearly that 70% of the water that comes to the estuary on average, on all the bad years, all the good years, and all the years in between, 70% comes from the basins and 30% comes from Lake Okeechobee. But the point I've been making in a number of presentations is that every single drop of that 30% that comes from Lake Okeechobee is harmful and detrimental to the estuary, because it's on top of what we're already getting is a lot of basin water. It's a very large basin. It's why we've worked so hard to get the Indian River Lagoon South project authorized and get it appropriated, is because that project recognized the problem that we have with a vast, too much basin water that comes, and that was one of the major fixes that was recognized early on in the CERT process.
And just because I'm sure that 99% of the people watching this understand what IRL South is, but maybe they don't. Just a quick little, what is IRL South? Why is it important? What is it important to us, and what does it mean? And then also maybe like a minute sort of cursor on SEP and why it's important that it gets included in WRDA, and why we're trying to get a WRDA bill passed before the changeover of this Congress. I think that's important for people to understand how important all of that is.
So the Indian River Lagoon, unless you,
Go ahead.
the Indian River, we'll tag team. The Indian River Lagoon South project is one of the early authorized Everglades restoration projects, and it has components that are currently authorized to build massive reservoirs and STAs throughout the system in the C44 area, which is currently under construction,
And we're-
C23, 24, and 25.
Just sort of point to people.
Okay, so for the
Will this go back?
The C44 reservoir and STA is here. Oh, you haven't even timed. The C23 and 24 reservoir and STA is planned for here. The C25 reservoir and STA is planned, and the C23, 24, and 25 are all located in St. Lucie County. But it's all part of the watershed, a massive amount of water that I think Kathy indicated in her earlier graphs have some major nutrient inputs into the North Fork of the St. Lucie River, and that all ends up in our estuary.
And so IRL South as approved really is 4 or 5 components as one project, correct?
These three authorized components, everything, the natural areas water storage is a separate component of the IRL South, but the authorized components are those three pieces of C44, C2324, and C25 reservoirs and STAs, and the C44 is under construction.
Great. And then the importance of SEP and why that's important. It gets included in the WARDA bill that we didn't get passed 2 months ago that we're going to try to get done before this Congress expires.
Well, what SEP will do is assist with water flowing south. So it's removing a lot of the barriers to water, some of the constraints, so to speak, of water moving south, and it'll take about 14% of water that is currently being discharged south. So it is
that
important.
combined with Hammy Trail, combined with some other components, will help some.
Yes,
And that's the next component to get approved.
yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Haddix?
Kathy, thanks for being here. And I'm going to vent frustration, not just with South Florida, but with everybody that I think our constituents are upset and angry with. We went to Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago. We asked the federal government for the president to declare a state of emergency. We didn't get that. We wanted that because it could have helped our small businesses recoup losses, financial losses. We wanted it because it could have paid for testing of what's been bestowed on us, and now we're paying for it instead of the federal and state governments. We asked for help from DEP for testing, from EPA for testing. We asked the governor to buy land in accordance with the state of Florida recommendations of 500,000 acre-feet north of the lake, 500,000 of acre-feet south of the lake. We don't see anything happening on that. We asked the Army Corps of Engineers, in conjunction with immediate problems with stopping the discharges completely for a 2-week period, to completely let our estuary, rivers, and lagoon flush. And what we've got is a great big zero. You've given us some help with storing additional water north, which we appreciate. But when I hear 35 years, and I think that we have a group of river kids, probably between 8 and 16 years old, those kids are going to be 50 in a 35-year time frame with their own kids fighting what they're fighting for right now. That is ridiculous. And what we need is, we need the federal and state governments, as Commissioner Hurd stated, to accelerate the entire process, fund it, and get it done. Get the final solution funded and completed. One of my initiatives that I want to bring up with my board members is we have a presidential election coming up in November, and it's my intention to invite Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton to Martin County. We will be dealing with one of them for the next 4 years, and it's critical for us to take the opportunity to invite them down, to make sure they're aware of what our issues are and how serious they are, and how serious our citizens are about getting resolution. And so I would ask my colleagues to write a letter to both the Hillary and Trump campaigns, inviting them to visit South Florida, Martin County, so that they can see firsthand, and so they have the opportunity to weigh in on whether they are going to support funding SERP completely and getting it done, or else they're going to continue with this 35-year program, which is ridiculous. And some of the things, you know, just on top, I hear about the Cape Sable sea sparrow. And, you know, I like birds and endangered species, but what about the manatees that are getting killed? What about hundreds of thousands of acres of seagrass? So we're going to save some birds that may be able to relocate on their own at the expense of our health, our economy, and our environment. People got to start using common sense here. So along with inviting the candidates, I think that should go on change.org so our citizens can weigh in via petition and let our presidential candidates know the numbers that they're dealing with down here and the seriousness of how our citizens take this issue. They want action. They're tired of being BS by both the state and the federal government. We want funding, and we want it now. We want the land bought. We want water moved south much quicker than what it's planned to be moved south. We want it stored north much quicker than it's planned on being stored north. So with that, I would ask my colleagues by either, if they need a motion, or by agreement, that we invite the presidential candidates to Martin County, Florida, and we place it on change.org so they can weigh in on it.
We have invited the Army Corps of Engineers to be here at 2:30. I understand they are here, and so we will postpone that for the time being and invite the Army Corps to. Are you going to be staying with us, Ms. LaMartina?
Do you want me to?
Sure.
That'd be great.
Please. So we will call in the Army.
Do you have copies?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I apologize for keeping you waiting.
No worries, ma'am. Thank you.
It's the last one there.
Right here?
Martin County.
Right here?
Yep, that's it. Got cancer.
Ready to have a seat and introduce yourself?
All right.
Did my screen just say that that Army thumb drive was a potential security concern?
I'm sure it's okay.
I just,
Sorry.
I'm sensitive about
No.
these things.
Okay.
You going to be able to get over here? Because he's going to be doing the talking. Okay. All right, just introduce yourself. Go through. Here's the...
Okay. Commissioners, I'm Rick McMillan with the Army Corps of Engineers. I'm chief of our multi-projects branch and operations division, under which I have the privilege of managing a team of water managers that manage Lake O and throughout North Florida as well as South Florida as well as Puerto Rico. So we have quite an area of influence that we're managing water within. Thank you for inviting me down to give you a quick presentation on LORS, as I understand it. So what I'd like to do is just have a couple slides for a lead-in and then jump into some of the details on that. Okay.
I got it.
As you know, one of the reasons for Lake Okeechobee and the dike that surrounds it stems from the hurricanes of 26 and 28, where we had a considerable loss of life. Most of you are aware. Resulting from that, just real quickly, Army Corps of Engineers stepped in through our Civil Works process. We started authorizing, through Congress, of course, construction of the dike and other features related to Central and South Florida over the years since then. The letter there on the right of your screen right there is a letter from Governor Jeb Bush dated 2006. One of the reasons for LORS, and there's two primary drivers, and then you'll see that as I go through. Two primary drivers for the preparation of 2008 LORS stems from the dike and levee safety concerns that were raised following Hurricane Katrina. This letter here from Governor Jeb Bush basically highlights those concerns and basically asks the Corps of Engineers and the federal government to start looking at the safety of that dike. One of the other drivers for LORS stemmed from the water quality in the lake. And I'll explain that a little bit further, but those are the two primary drivers for the development of LORS. One was dike safety, the other is the water quality within the lake. Prior to LORS, we operated the lake, we managed the lake stages under what we called the WSC, or the Water Supply and Environmental Regulation Schedule. That particular schedule required us to do a lot of extra work with regards to preparing deviations to that water management plan as lake levels rose, as they receded, where the water went. It required a great deal of effort on our part to prepare those deviations in order for us to stay compliant with permits and NEPA. One of the other things about that particular regulation schedule is that it limited our flexibility to move water, meaning when it called for a high release, we had to release those high volumes at the time. Okay, so under LORS, we have a much more flexible schedule, although it's not the best, but it is much more flexible than the way we were managing it before and give us much more flexibility. And as I mentioned, that other bullet right there is under 2008 LORS, we attempt to manage the lake at a much lower stages, because if we manage the lake at a much lower stages, then the ecology of the lake is much better. And that's what we've been seeing. Whereas before, under WSE, we managed the lakes at higher stages. We held water, but that also was degraded the water quality. And when we had high releases up there, generally you saw chocolate brown water coming out of the lake at the time. Not to say that we don't have it now from time to time, but it is a much better quality that's coming out than what it was then. And we have much more ecology on the lake than we had before, whereas we have more snail kites on the lake now, whereas under WSC we didn't have snail kites on the lake. Little background, little statistics, stats, data for Lake Okeechobee. The surface area of the lake is roughly 730 square miles. The drainage basin is actually 4 times the size of that lake. Water can come into the lake at much faster than we can get it out of the lake. Okay, whether it's north, south, east, whether it's south or east or west, the water will come into that lake faster than we can get it out. Just so for talking purposes, 3 inches of water on the Kissimmee watershed, Lake O watershed basin correlates to 1 foot on the lake once it drains down. The evaporation on the lake actually removes more water than what we can get out of the lake at times. And the constraints on the lake, as my colleague that presented before, we have a number of constraints on the lake: structural, hydrological, meteorological, ecology. We look at all of those things when we come to our releases on Lake O, and I'll discuss that here in a moment. Just to give you a quick snapshot, pictorial of Lake Okeechobee and the structures that we manage in order to reduce the stages within the lake. You'll see the Lake Okeechobee there. We have Lake Okeechobee Waterway. On the Okeechobee Waterway, we basically have 5 structures. On the west side, you'll see structure there at Moore-Haven called S77. Moving downstream, you'll see 78 at Ortona Locks, and then at Franklin Locks, you'll see S79. Those are critical because in LORS, those are our trigger points. 77 and 79 are our trigger points that trigger how much water comes out of the lake at what time. On the east side, you'll see S308 there at Port Myakka, as well as S80. Once again, those S80 is the trigger point for our release decisions on how much we release water into those estuaries. As you can see in the blue diamonds, there are 3 outlets to the south that empty into the EAA, and it gives us the means to push water into the stormwater retention areas and then ultimately into the conservation areas. What you'll see on that on your bottom right-hand side is that we have the capacity to move more water east and west than we do moving it south by that percentage. Okay. When we manage the water, when we sit down and go through our release decision every week, we look at these basic things. Not in any particular order except the very first one, and that is on Hubert Hoover Dike. We're very much concerned about the public safety and health. And I'll highlight that here in a minute because we're not in a favorable place on the lake right now with regards to the stages, and I'll highlight that in a moment. But we also look at the lake ecology, how it is impacting the recession rates on the lake and how that would impact the snail kites. Maintaining a certain water depth on the lake for navigation. We look at the estuaries and the salinity levels in the estuaries and the oysters spawning season every April. We look at how much water we can push into the Everglades via the water conservation areas and what the condition of those conservation areas are, as well as the STAs. And we also look at water supply, basically for the EAA and for the farmers to pull water out of the lake. We look at a gambit of things when we make our release decision under 2008 laws, whereas under the previous regulation schedule, we didn't look at all these things. We just looked at the stage in the lake and how comfortable we felt at that time of the year in getting the water out of the lake. Our decision-making process is highlighted here by a number of things that we look at. In addition to the ecology and the things I just presented to you in a much general nature, we look at the Central and South Florida project and the conditions south of the lake. Basically, what are the conditions in the EAA? Do they need water? What are the conditions of the water conservation area? Are they above schedule? What are the conditions of the STAs to process the water? Are some of them offline? Are they full? Has it been raining south of the lake? Those are the things that we look at, in our decision process, in our ability to move water south. We look at historical records, lake levels, because this is all about probability. What's the probability that we're going to get a storm at a certain time that's going to cause our lake to jump significantly? We look at the estuary conditions, as I mentioned. We certainly do look at the salinity levels within the lake, and we factor that into our decisions every week, as well as spawning season when the time occurs. We look at the ecology on the lake. One of the things that continue to be emphasized to us is the recession rates on the lake, not only on Lake Okeechobee, but on the Kissimmee chain of lakes, because recession rate affects the ecology, it affects snail kite nesting, and a host of other animal species. As I mentioned, the water conservation areas, what the conditions are there in the stormwater retention areas. We look at current climate conditions. We look at a 7-day and a 14-day climate rainfall prediction. We also look at 6 to 9 months out to determine what those conditions are going to be, whether they're going to be above normal rainfall or below normal rainfall. We also look at the hydrological conditions in the watershed. Is it saturated, which means any rain that comes into that watershed is coming directly into the lake. It won't be filtering into the soil. So how fast will the watershed drain? We look at the projected lake level rise, and you'll see one of my last slides will show where we expect to be at the end of this year. We look at the water supply needs south of the lake. As you recall, last year there was a tremendous water supply need because we were in a drought last summer. So we pulled a great deal of water out of the lake for the farmers. Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule. It's hard. Can they see that arrow?
Yes, they can.
Okay. Let me try and capture this for you. The areas in red is where we do not want to be. Areas in red at the top, on the top screen right there, you'll see this dark band right here. That is above that is high lake management band, which means you can expect high releases if we get above that. In the intermediate range, which is from here down to here, basically, okay, we have a couple things. It's broken out into 3 areas: high, intermediate, and low. If we get above the yellow line right here, there are certain measures that we have to start considering as far as managing that lake. We have to start doing inspections around the lake because we're concerned about dike failure. Where we'd like to be is in the area of the green and the yellow. We do not want to get outside that if at all possible. Okay, and preferred range of managing the lake right now is between 12.5 and 15.5 feet. What we have found is that helps with the ecology, it helps with our dike safety, and it also sets us up to provide low volume releases to the estuaries as needed, rather than the high volumes that you've been experiencing. This is rather detailed, but this is our decision tree for Lake Okeechobee. Okay. You have the high lake management band, you have high, intermediate, and low bands, and then you have the base flow. And if we get below base flow, then we basically stop releasing from the lake because they're in water shortage band. But what you see is, for instance, if we get into a low the low decision tree of the lake. Okay, we look at tributary hydrological conditions, and that's basically the net inflow that comes into the lake. We have the flow that comes in from the lake from the north. We also have the rainfall that comes in there versus what the outflow is going to be. How much water can we push south? How much goes east and west? How much is evaporation chewing up? And so based on the volume of our net inflow into the lake, it will tell us whether we're very wet or whether we're wet or whether we're normal or whether we're dry. And that kicks us into these various other decision trees. And as you can see, over here on the right-hand side, you have a number of release decisions at the various structures, S79 and S80. What I want to point out to you is that the difference between, one of the primary differences between LORS 2008 and the way we operated the lake before under WSC is that these up-twos, we have the operational flexibility to manage within those up-to limits. Okay, whereas before, there was some up-twos, but it was pretty much a hard and fast rule on to what our releases were going to be. Okay, and if we wanted to change those, that's where those deviations came in that we had to process. That took up a great deal of time, and we weren't very quick at those deviations. Unfortunately, that's our process. Okay, the other part of LORS is what we call LORS Part C. This is what tells us how much water we can push south. Not so much how much, but can we push water south into the conservation areas. You have the same bands as you saw before. Okay, but generally we wind up in this little block right here. Maximum practicable to the lake. But those conditions are dependent upon what is the condition in those water conservation areas. Today, Lake Conservation Area 3A is about 1/2 foot above schedule. Conservation Area 2 is about 4/10 of a foot above schedule. Conservation Area 1, which is the smallest of them, is actually about 4/10 of a foot below schedule. So when they are below schedule is when we have the opportunity to push water in the conservation areas and then push it either south or start pushing it to tide. Sometimes we use the conservation areas as a pass-through. As it comes out of the STAs, cleaned up, pushes into the water conservation areas, and then we can push it to tide through other various structures that we have in South Florida. Today, these are the conditions that we're seeing today and how the water is moving around. As you can see, with respect to St. Lucie Estuary, actually these were conditions yesterday. At the end of the day, they will be updated. At S80, we've moved 820 CFS to St. Lucie Estuary. 308 moved 940 CFS. And the reason S80 is lower than 308 is because for water supply. We have FPL up there that's pulling water for their facility up there. So we will move water out of 308 to accommodate water supply. With respect to Caloosahatchee, you'll see at S77, we only got 130 CFS out of the lake yesterday, primarily because rainfall, thank you, Deb, primarily because the rainfall in that basin chewed up whatever our release targets were. And our target for Caloosahatchee is 2,800 CFS at S79. And you can see where we exceeded that. The majority of that, except for 130 CFS, basically, was all local rainfall, local runoff. And one final note on this particular page, you'll see these three structures right here, 351 and 352, and even C10. We're actually pushing water south to the EAA. And some of that water is actually going into the conservation areas. Okay. With respect to this year, just to give you a synopsis, because I know you, all of you experienced it quite intimately here, the dry season update. We ran in an El Nino this year. This is a 1 in a 20-year type El Nino event. The last time we had this kind of rainfall was 1997, 1998. In December, there was 200% above normal rainfall south of the lake. Our lake held steady. The lake level held steady until mid-January. In January, we started experiencing record rainfall on the lake and in South Florida. 18 inches of rainfall. That goes back to 1930, the highest record rainfall on record. Okay, so this is one of those abnormal years. The stage in the lake held steady until mid-January. In mid-January, it started rising, 500% above normal rainfall on the lake, in the watershed basin. At one point in late January, we were seeing inflows of 56,000 CFS into the lake. And you can compare that to the releases today of 500 CFS that's a release decision at S80, at target at S80. So our lake started rising significantly. What I want to do on this slide is capture basically a snapshot through time of what our release decisions based and how we came, what those release decisions were at S79, at S80, and even at S77 as the rainfall came down and as the lake stages started going up. As I just mentioned to you, in December, the lake stages basically held steady, and we were releasing 1,000, 1,500 CFS to the Caloosahatchee, measured at S79, and we were no releases to St. Lucie. And over here on the right-hand side, you can see the lake stages pretty much held steady, 14 and a half and 14 and 3/4. Then in mid-January, we started getting all that rainfall, and our release decisions started going up. You can see the lake jumped on us in a month, nearly a foot, because of that rainfall. And it wasn't done. January 30, our release decision moved from S79 to S77 so we could get direct water out of the lake. Because at S79 and S80, we got to pass the local runoff first before we start releasing water out of the lake to the estuaries. So S77, you can see 6,500 CFS to the west, and we were pushing 2,800 CFS to the east. On February 5th, the lake here peaked out at 16.25 feet, and we were releasing the maximum possible because that lake was rising on us. And you can see in the matter of 5 days, it jumped another half a foot in 5 days on us. That's how fast they can rise with the rainfall that was coming down. And then we started working our way back down to lower releases. You can see in March, the trigger was still at 77, 4,000 CFS to the west, 1,800 CFS to the east. The lake stages started coming down, and you can see it. The trigger moved from 77 to 79, and we started and continued to drop our releases. By the end of April, we were back down in a range that we thought was compatible for everybody. But by then, there was a tremendous amount of fresh water in the estuaries. Okay. But then in May, we started seeing the lake rise on us again. And we were still over 14 feet. And so today, July 15th, the stage on the lake is 14.73, and as you'll see here in a couple more slides, today's stage on the lake is 14.69 feet. The amount of water that was moved since November out of the lake, Moorhaven, if you recall, Moorhaven is the structure at S77. We moved 1.2 million in excess acre feet out of the lake. Out of Port Mayaca, 308, which empties into the St. Lucie Canal there, 570,000 acre feet. And the flows to the south during this time that we were able to accomplish, even though everything to the south was full, we were able to push another 500,000+ acre feet to the south. All told, we're looking at 2.3 million acre feet in excess, which correlates to roughly 5 feet of water on the lake that we were able to get off between now and then. And the lake is still not in a comfortable place for us. This slide right here, everything shaded in blue is the stage on the lake. from January 1st until now. You can see the lake peaked in February at 16 1/4. Through those releases, we were able to bring it down to a low of roughly 13.7, and then it started climbing again on us. It got up to nearly 15 feet, and today, as I mentioned, it's sitting at roughly 14.7 feet, 6.9 actually. What I want to point out to you here is that we're not even in the peak hurricane season yet, and our lake is sitting at just under 15 feet. These curves right here, one of these is 2008. I believe it's this one right here. This was Tropical Storm Faye in 2008, and you can see that particular storm caused the lake to jump nearly 4 feet. Okay, if we got that type of jump, and it's not uncommon because you can see in 2008, and you see another one here where the lake's jumped, and even later in the year, you'll see where the lake is jumped on us too. If we see experience those type of jumps at this stage, we are in uncharted territory on that lake. The highest the lake has ever been is in 1947 at 18.7 feet. We are sitting at nearly 15 feet, and if we see a 4-foot jump, we're at 19 feet. And one of our concerns is all the construction improvements that we're doing to the dike right now. Because what we'll see is overtopping of those cofferdams on those culvert constructions. That is our concern, if we see those kind of jumps. That's one of the reasons why we continue to release right now to the extent possible that we can. Looking forward, this is where we kind of project is everything in blue is where the lake stage was beginning in January. We're projecting everything highlighted in the blue is a 50% probability where that lake might be by the 1st of November. We're looking at about 16 feet. That's 50% probability. 80% probability, which gives us more certainty, is that somewhere between the pink areas here and the blue areas is where we're going to be. Everything's conditional upon the rainfall and the storms that are going to come at us. But these projections here are based upon a period of record from 1965 to 2007. So you can see why we are so concerned right now. We're not out of the woods yet on that lake, and we're not even at peak hurricane season yet. When the lake stages get above 15.5, we start performing weekly inspections of the lake to start looking for seepage, start looking at some of the boils. We have a good history on that dike where would potentially see some of those concerns. 16.5, we're going to be inspecting the lake on a daily basis. When we get up to 17.5 feet, that's tremendous concern for us. With respect to the dike and the improvements that are going on, I present this to you to give you a feel for all the construction efforts that have gone on and what has been planned. With respect to the culverts, we currently have 18 culverts under contract. We have 32 culverts that have to be addressed. We've addressed 21 of them. That includes the 18. We have a number of culverts that have to be addressed. We also have cutoff walls, particularly along this reach right here and a portion in here that we have planned. Once we complete these repairs, and they are scheduled to be 2022, that's when we intend to reinitiate lowers. Is that once we get these features in place, and actually this pink area, this cutoff wall in this pink area right here, won't be completed till 2024. What we want to do is reinitiate lowers about 2 years before then, so that we have a new regulation schedule when these repairs are going to be done. Okay. With that, that concludes my presentation, and I'm open to any questions.
I will start because we're going to have to take a break soon for our closed captioning. I understand what you're confronted with and the mathematical projections that you deal with, and to avoid the ultimate disaster that we know it would be should the lake breach. But how did this become Sophie's choice? Because the other choice, I mean, you're looking at forecasts. Now, the South Florida Water Management District would call those myths because they're not proven. You can't prove that there's going to be rain, extra rain in September. So that's a myth, but a myth of concern to you. So you're sending harmful algae blooms. Do you call them HABs or HABs?
HABs.
Okay, you're sending HABs our way. And those HABs very likely, well, we know they can and do contain liver failure, liver cancer, and probably contain Alzheimer's and Lou Gehrig's disease. So how did we lose Sophie's choice, and why does there have to be a Sophie's choice? Why? I know it's not the Army Corps' mission, responsibility, or orders to decide between sending us diseases or choosing a potential loss of life through flooding in other communities, but who is forcing this choice? And who can stop it? The South Florida Water Management District says it's not responsible for managing blue-green algae, and that Lake Okeechobee isn't the only cause of the HABs. So who is responsible for this? Who is supposed to do something? Who decides that this community must face these potential fatal diseases? Where do we look for leadership on this?
With respect to looking for leadership, ma'am, I know my general from SAD was down here. I know Congressman or Senator Rubio was here. I know the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Work was down here recently. And because of them being down here and what you had showed them, they raised the concern to us, and our commander, who has the ultimate decision in how much water gets released within his area of operation. We went back, we worked with Water Management District to try and reduce the inflows. They were accommodating in that respect, and we were able to reduce the releases significantly over the last 2 weeks to the estuary. And it comes down to risk with respect to our decision. How much risk are we willing to assume with respect to the lake rising to a certain level, to a harmful level, versus the amount of releases that we release to the estuary? How much risk are we willing to assume? And that's where we find ourselves today, is that this is
So do
the
you
level of risk.
recognize any health risks to us?
I can't answer the health risk on that, ma'am. I'm not a medical practitioner, nor am I a biologist. I happen to be an engineer.
Okay, Commissioner Smith.
Rick, is it possible to go back to the last screen, the one just before this one? That one. Reach 1 is done for all intents and purposes?
Yes,
So the next focus is B, Reach 2.
I believe so.
Do we have any idea what the cost of that is and what the value of those projects are?
I do not have an actual specific cost for Reach B. I think we're still working on that, ultimate scope for that.
Commissioner
But
Scott,
I can attempt to get you an answer for that.
that would be great. Commissioner Scott discussed when we were in DC that we were there asking for specific things to happen. And you mentioned that until B is done, we're not going to revisit lowers again.
Right.
We're also asking for lowers to be revisited. So the quid pro quo is that we need to know how much B is,
Okay.
and we need to know how soon can we get those funds appropriated, by who is the proper channel to appropriate. I know that you do not, I understand that. But some of the folks you mentioned earlier that were here recently are. And we need to be really succinct in our ask so that we can help you help us.
Okay.
Because until B gets done and other portions, but if B is the specific issue that gives us a larger range, then that has got to be the first thing we all focus on. And I think that was the message that we left in DC, but I kind of wish we'd had this conversation prior to being there so we could have been a little bit more specific in the ask. But I think as soon as you can get us that number, I think we will all, this entire community will be committed to doing so. And I also it was just a curiosity question. I think FPL had agreed to take on more capacity in their lake. Is that what the transfer of those, the amounts of water were that you mentioned earlier?
I'll have to look into that for you and then get back to
I
you
see
on
a
that.
shaking of the head from behind you, so I'm assuming
Okay.
that,
Shaking?
because I had understood it was
Okay.
this kind of a shake, not this.
Yep.
Because I had heard 2-3 weeks ago that they were going to take on more volume, and so I'm assuming that that's what that was.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thanks.
Yeah, it's
Commissioner
2.2
Field.
billion gallons. 2.2 billion gallons is the increase that FPL, and that's really, we're so appreciative that they've stepped forward to help us on that. We greatly appreciate. Appreciate, too, what y'all have done, and Colonel Kirk and his, I think, and this is my personal perception, but I believe Colonel Kirk, every time he can, I think he makes a decision that benefits us. I think that's how I see it. Now, I'm not asking you to verify or not verify. I'm just telling you that's how I see it. I believe his intention is to help us. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm happy. That's a different thing. I'm not terribly happy, but I do believe that the efforts that are being made within the constraints of how he sees the realities of pressures are those that he believes he's able to accomplish. I would like for us to see just stop the flow there at 308 for the next 4 weeks. I think that would be extremely useful for us. That's what I want. Now, what y'all have done has helped. I didn't think it would, so I was a skeptic, but it has helped. And so I'll have to admit that and very much appreciate what y'all have done. So by reducing the flows to the amounts that you have, and then coming into those 2 days a week no flows, that has allowed our central areas of water to clean up. Now, not these pockets but it has allowed. And so thank you for that. And I do, now I don't know, I'm not trying to drag everybody else into it, but I see that you're a good partner and that you are making efforts to help us, and I appreciate that. And the district they've taken steps that allow y'all to have flexibilities that you wouldn't have otherwise. So I see it working well and very much appreciate it. So best to Colonel Kirk, and hope that those decisions will flow our way as often as possible.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chief.
Commissioner Hurd.
Yes, thanks for coming, Mr. McMillan. I've been paying very close attention to the river conditions here for 30 years, and they've deteriorated dramatically in the 30 years that I've been watching closely. At no time have the conditions been as appalling as they have been this summer with the blue-green algae. And I'm very concerned about the state and the federal protection agencies' unwillingness to consider our health and safety. Commissioner Scott brought it up. I'm not afraid of drowning, but I really am afraid of dying of Lou Gehrig's disease. And if my chances are increased because I'm living here, then either that problem needs to be fixed or I need to move. But I wonder, are these agencies that are tasked with protecting us not doing the testing that they should be doing because they don't want to know the outcome? They don't want to find out that those discharges are killing us. I think it's high time that both the state and the federal government step up and really assess the toxins that are in this water and in the air that we're breathing. we need to expedite Herbert Hoover Dike rehabilitation. We need to expedite lures, and we need to expedite the integrated delivery schedule timing for EAA storage. Right now, design is projected in 2021. We can't wait till 2021. We need to do that now because the state has the ability to buy the land. So let's figure out the storage that we need in the EAA. Let's plan for it. Let's buy the land, and let's treat the water.
You ready? Good afternoon, Deb Drum, Ecosystem Manager. Going to provide a brief water conditions update, including sharing the results of the air quality tests that we've done, and we will be releasing those results in the report today. Current conditions, you heard Lake Okeechobee is at 14.69 feet, exactly the same where it was about a week ago. A year ago, for reference, it was at just over 12 feet. You could hear what Mr. McMillan was talking about with the concerns that they have. The inflows are about 3,500, outflows about 2,000. We expect the lake to either stay stable or increase under those conditions. We're currently getting releases of about 650 cubic feet per second, and that's an average weekly number. And salinities are getting up to 20 parts per thousand when there's no flows from the lake. So we are seeing improved salinity conditions, and we've seen improved conditions with the blue-green algae in some of the concentrated areas as well. I'll share that with you. Temperatures have remained pretty stable. This is just to point out, Commissioner Fielding mentioned the pulse release. So for the total 650 average CFS a week, on Fridays, we get 900 under that scenario. On Saturdays, we get a peak at 1,500, Sundays, 900, and then it comes back down. And on Wednesdays and Thursdays, we get 0 CFS released, and that comprises that 650 average that we're currently getting. What this shows is the up and down are the changes with tides, the changes in salinity with tides, but what you see is this trend upward. So we're seeing a higher range of salinity, which has been improving our water conditions. This is Bathtub Beach taken yesterday. Really don't look pretty clear water. No, you don't really see any algae out there at that time. Again, the conditions look pretty good on the beaches as we sit here. Moving into the air quality testing, Martin County contracted for air quality testing as previously reported with EnviroTeam North America. We sampled at 4 sites, 2 residential and 2 business sites. And we tested for hydrogen sulfide, species of algae, toxin levels present, and respirable particles, whether or not the algae could be inhaled. We also took 2 water quality samples along with those air quality samples, and that was at the outboards only and central marine sites. We also, in developing the methodology and the approach for the air quality sampling, we did receive direction from the Florida Department of Health and the Center for Disease Control regarding sampling protocols to ensure that we were sampling in a way for hydrogen sulfide and other microcystins that were consistent with approaches that they were familiar with or that they had used in the past. This is what that looked like. Here's somebody taking a sample, the water quality sample, so you can get an idea. When I say water quality sample, it's really right in the thick of where the algae is. It gives you a visual what that looks like. And here's some of the air testing equipment. And here's another visual of some other equipment that they used. To get right down to it, the air quality sampling conclusions that were for hydrogen sulfide, levels were discernible at levels which may be intolerable for individuals with respiratory conditions and with respiratory conditions and asthmatics. So if you're somebody who's around that has either one of those conditions, you might find it especially irritating. For water toxins, the microcystin levels in the algal water samples present a very significant health threat upon direct exposure or ingestion. In some cases, they were 100 to 1,000 times more than the acceptable limit of 10 micrograms per liter. I do want to point out here that we've worked with a couple different companies to give us water samples during this event to do our own spot checks in the areas where the algae was thick. And from this study, we had at Central Marine 33,000 micrograms per liter. At Outboards Only, it was just under 14,000 micrograms per liter, and that was in day 2 of them doing their algae removal demonstration project. And we had other independent results from another lab at 40,000 micrograms per liter. So what we know now that we didn't know before is that when you have these very highly concentrated areas of this microcystin algae, the potential for very, very extreme toxicity levels exists, and we need to be cognizant of that. Regarding airborne toxins, microcystin levels in the air were identified, indicating that toxins can become aerosolized, especially when they're agitated. It should be noted here, very important notation, that there are no set standards for inhalation risk by any federal, state, or local regulatory agency. So we continue to defer to our public health authorities for inhalation avoidance or inhalation risk concerns. This is something that we are not versed in. We do need support to better understand what kind of levels of toxins are problematic. Although the ones that we saw seem to be on the lower end, low levels, maybe consistent with other scientific papers that had not been levels of concern. But again, we're not the ones qualified to make that determination. Regarding particulates, this is an important one. Measured respirable particle concentrations were within an expected range for what you would expect to see in an outdoor environment, is what our consultant told us. However, there were increased particle concentrations measured associated with the water pump discharge with the algal removal technology that was happening at Outboards Only. And that suggests that we really do need to do some further study to determine what impact an activity like that might have on human animal exposure and or the environment, because we did see those respirable particle concentrations go up in that area, especially downstream or downwind of where the activity was occurring. So this might suggest that if such a technology were to be used again, that perhaps instead of discharging the water at the surface of the water, that it should be done underwater, or that you might have an area, a nice buffer area around the area where work was being done where there wasn't any threat to downstream communities. And regarding volatile organic compounds, they were not detectable. So what we have is to protect people themselves and families and pets from exposure. We are asking to continue to heed the advice that we've been giving consistently over the last month. Avoid areas with visible algal concentrations or algal scums in the sea as well as on the shore. Direct contact and swallowing appreciable amounts are associated with the highest health risk. Don't swim, water ski, or boat in areas where water is discolored or where you see foam, scum, or mats of algae in the water. If you do swim in water that might have a cyanobacteria, we're suggesting you rinse off with fresh water as soon as possible. When you're on the beach, you should avoid sitting downwind of any of the dried material drying on the shoreline, which could form an aerosol that could be inhaled as a potential risk. One of the big risks that there are with cyano blooms are pets and livestock that swim or drink in areas. If a dog swims in the water and then licks itself afterwards, the algae and toxins can be embedded in its fur, and they need to be rinsed off immediately if they should come into contact. We also ask that people continue to respect any water body closures that are announced by local public health authorities. And if any health effects are subsequently experienced in whatever the nature of the exposure, seek medical advice. Again, the healthcare practitioners have been notified by the Department of Health, and they are collecting information. Most of the reports so far have been limited to upper respiratory. I think all of them have been upper respiratory irritation at this point. The next steps, we provided this report to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and to the Florida Department of Health. We have requested their review and determination on health risks and notices. They indicated, the Florida Department of Health indicated today it will take them several weeks to review the report. And in the meantime, our advice to the public is to avoid contact with areas with blue-green algae. And I am continuing to follow up on your request from last week to identify monitoring needs to assist in better managing blue-green algae blooms in the future and understand what our monitoring needs are. We want to take a more thoughtful approach and fully understanding how we might answer some of the questions that we've learned we have. In better news, this is what Central Marine looks like. I took this picture at noon today, these photos at noon today. Had no treatment at Central Marine. The algae blooms have naturally come, and now they have gone. There are still some signs of some microcystis algae kind of floating in the basin. You could kind of see these little pieces of it down here, but I thought that was a very interesting observation to see that it took a full 5 weeks of really, really intolerable and difficult conditions, but it did get better. And so that is really part of the information that we're continuing to collect for us to better understand what kind of monitoring that we need to do over time. If there's no more questions about this, I'm going to change gears because I heard that you might want to get an update on the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. There's a public meeting tonight, and I attended the meeting for Martin County all day yesterday in Okeechobee to represent our interests. Could we move on to that? You okay with that? Okay. So the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, there was a kickoff meeting yesterday. It's a group called the Project Delivery Team, and yesterday was day one of a 3-year planning process. I wanted to bring to your awareness that all of these projects that are listed on the integrated delivery schedule, each of them have a planning process, and those planning processes have been condensed to 3 years. They used to take longer. And so every time that we initiate a new CERT project, it's a 3-year planning process, and that's before you have a plan that you can go to Congress and try to get money to help fund it. So I want to set the expectations for what this looks like. There is a public meeting tonight at 6 p.m. to provide public comment. They are accepting comments on the project for this initial phase called the scoping period until August 12th, 2016. And if anybody wants more information, here's a website, http://bit.ly/Lake O Watershed. If you go to that link, it has all of the documents that you could ever want to read about this project. What I will suggest is that here is the Lake Okeechobee Watershed Project preliminary planning boundary, and I focused in on the word preliminary planning boundary. You might all want to decide before August 12th if you want to make comment on what the boundary is. And so here is the boundary, and some of the discussions that we had yesterday at the meeting, it seemed that there might be some opportunities within the coastal basin boundaries, meaning the basins that I'm circling here to the west of Lake Okeechobee and to the east off of the map here into Martin County, that there might be some opportunities for some project elements for this in those basins, and that maybe we should consider looking at asking for that change in boundary. The project objectives are to reduce undesirable discharges from the lake to the estuaries. And it looks at improving the quantity, timing, and distribution of water, try to put some projects in place that can increase overall flexibility for operations and restore isolated wetlands in the watershed. And when we were in our discussions yesterday, we really did find quite a few opportunities for wetland restoration to occur. One of the big ideas was to look at, in this area of Lake Okeechobee in the west, it's a humongous marsh system. It doesn't even look like a lake. It looks like a vegetated, beautiful Everglades wetland. And one of the ideas yesterday was to get such a littoral zone created on the east, because what all that vegetation does is it makes extremely clean water go to the west. We don't have that benefit. And so one of the ideas is to include a wetland restoration of this littoral zone to the east to at least get some cleansing of the water as it leaves the lake and goes into the canal. That was something I thought you would be interested in hearing. That's one of the early ideas. The project constraints that they're working under, and these are basically rules of the road as they move forward, they will maintain existing levels of flood protection and water supply. So any permitted water users or any flood protection that's provided will not be jeopardized by any ideas that come up. Cultural, historical, and archaeological resources, of which there could be many, are preserved. Environmental justice issues are followed. Applicable laws, regulations, and standards, they look at endangered species, et cetera, navigation, and the Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule. Again, you heard earlier that will not be really reconsidered until the 2022 timeframe. And that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Thank you
Thank you.
very much. Commissioner Hurd?
I have a comment, and that's that I think that we should make a comment about expanding the Lake O watershed preliminary planning boundary, expand the boundaries to east and west, and/or create a restoration of a littoral zone on the eastern end of Lake Okeechobee to mimic the one that's on the western side.
We can do that.
Sure, why not? Yeah,
I'll
until August 12th.
We have till August 12th, and
Commissioner?
then I will be, of course, entering into a 3-year assignment
Yes, you
on
are.
this. So we'll keep you informed and make sure that your input gets included.
Commissioner Haddix?
I want to thank staff for doing the testing. When I looked at the comments that FDEP and CDC were nice enough to give us protocols so we could pay for our own testing for the filthy water that they sent our way in the algae. That's just another slap in the face. It's disgusting. I see the whole issue, the agencies. I think there are good people in the agencies that want to try to work with us and help, but they're confined by leadership. That's the governor, that's the president, and until we get leadership at those levels, we're going to just be beating our heads against the wall. And so again, I bring up, we're going to be dealing with a new president for 4 years. And again, I bring up to my colleagues to, we do a letter to invite them both to visit Martin County to learn about our issue and to find out where they stand. And second, that we do it on change.org so our citizens and our residents can weigh in with emails on a petition to let them know how important it is and how many people are upset about what's going on and the lack of either immediate solutions that we requested or long-term solutions to be accelerated.
Commissioner Smith?
John, I agree. There has been a private effort along those same lines that's been being worked on, but I agree that a formal, perhaps, letter from the board asking for that, what could it possibly hurt? They need Florida, both of them need Florida to win. Mm-hmm. You can't win the presidency without Florida. And so maybe it would be helpful for both of them. I mean, Mr. Trump has his residency just, 20 miles to the south of us, so it shouldn't be any great surprise where his backyard is. And clearly, I think there's an opportunity for us to see if we can't gain their attention. So I support your idea, and if that's a letter, whether it's signed by all of us or from the chair, it doesn't matter to me, but I think we should do such a thing.
Well, it's an unusual thing to do. I don't know that it's ever been done. And it is us stepping into a really volatile political arena.
That's what I like about it.
Would you be amenable, Commissioner Haddix, to us hearing from our legislative aides and lobbyists as to the possible pitfalls of doing such a thing?
Madam Chair, I think we're already suffering from pitfalls. It's we have a partisan battle going on right now between a Republican governor and a Democratic president, and I think that's what affected the state of emergency. I don't see where we can get into any worse of a situation than we're in already with what's going on. So I don't want to consult with them. I want to just do the invitation, get it out there, and try to get them down here. That's who we're going to work with for the next 4 years.
I think that's a fine idea.
All right, well, I believe we have consensus.
That's all.
And other than our letter, I still think that we put it on change.org and we let our citizens weigh in via emails as part of my suggestion.
Sure.
Commissioner Smith?
I think we should use every known option on how to communicate that request. I think we have folks in Washington, we have folks in Tallahassee. I think there are probably campaign headquarters for both candidates here in the state. If we need to go visit them personally, I think it's an opportunity that, why wouldn't we take full advantage of this? And we may be just little Martin County, but I think there's a lot of people here who can expand that ask significantly. So.
All right. Okay. Anything further? Commissioner Fielding?
Well, I think we ought to try to make it something that would have utility to it, so that when we send whatever we're sending, that it really has some viability, and that's what Ms. Drum would be able to help us accomplish. And so it's not just a froth letter that says, hey, come down here, but really it gives, in a concise form, it would give some very precise information. And what I understood you to say, and I hesitated to even ask you about it because I thought it was so overwhelming, but some of those readings, as you compare to what the World Health Organization said is problematic, when they're talking about 10 micrograms per liter, and we said we had 40,000, I think that might get somebody's attention if they realize the
Extreme toxicity is over 100 micrograms per liter is the extreme level. And yes, these are 40,000, 33,000, 14,000. They're almost, I never imagined that we would see numbers like that moving into this situation that we're in right
So
now.
I think that kind of focus, I believe, will, in conjunction with what John's asked for, is let's put those things together. And yes, we want you to come, and here's what's happening to us. So I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
So there's two letters, one about the Lake Okeechobee watershed, asking for that change in boundary. I will write that for the chair's signature, and another letter from the chair. I'll work with the legislative staff. They'll take the lead on it to provide some technical substance on a letter to the presidential candidates as an invitation to come down, and we'll put some technical substance to that letter as well.
But again, it has more impact if it's over the signature of all 5 commissioners.
Okay, then we'll do all 5.
Yeah, Ms. West is here. She'll take the lead on it. She's over there behind the cameras.
Okay,
Okay, thank you very much.
that concludes item 7ABC.